You can open any chapter with confidence if you know how to tackle these 7 opening approaches: an establishing shot, a narrative launch, a zoom, action, dialogue, jump cuts, and dissolves. Now, these aren't the only ways you can open a chapter, but they're the techniques I find the most helpful to know. If you do know them, you'll be able to be more versatile, enhance engagement, have a greater control over your readers' expectations, and be better equipped when facing the many challenges that come with being a writer. Some of these techniques will be a bit more advanced than others, such as the dissolve, and will open your mind to a world of possibilities you might not have ever considered. And some of them might provide you with a new groundwork to view things from, such as an important lesson about using action in an opening. The one thing I can say for certain is, if you're interested in increasing your awareness of craft and artistry in writing, this is the place to be. And if you don't believe me, give me the chance to show you what I mean with dialogue as a starting point. Approach number 1, opening with dialogue. If you've ever heard, never start with dialogue, I want to argue against it. Now, I get where they're coming from. Most attempts to start with dialogue are bad, and there are many cases where you don't want to do this. So, first, let's get some general tips down. 1. Keep it simple with 2 characters. Starting with 2 characters keeps things in the clear and straightforward. More than that, and your reader might get lost trying to figure out who's who. 2. Make the chit-chat exciting. Jump into something intriguing or intense. Forget the more mundane small talk. Make those first lines of dialogue really count. 3. Hold off on the info dump. Avoid dropping a ton of info right at the start. Keep it natural and easy. 4. Skip the tags. You know, the he said, she said stuff. It runs the risk of being dull in the opening. You typically want to just let the dialogue do its thing. 5. Throw in some beats. Beats are like little actions or body language that breaks up the dialogue. They add some flavor and give the reader a feel for what's going on beyond words. 6. Drop a hint about the place. You don't need a full-on description, but let your readers know if your characters are chatting in a cafe or arguing on a spaceship. Just a hint will do. 7. Make clear the POV right from the start. Make it obvious which of the 2 characters is your main viewpoint. It helps readers get anchored into the story. 8. Name drop your POV character. If you're writing in third person, mention your POV character's name early helps you make things feel real for your readers. And 9. Let the non-POV character kick things off. It's kind of more natural if the non-POV character speaks first and your main character reacts. It just flows better. As for when you want to start with dialogue, here's when. 1. If you want to immediately engage the reader, a snippet of interesting dialogue can pique curiosity. 2. When your character has a distinctive voice or tone you want to convey. 3. When you want to propel your reader straight in without any preamble. 4. If the dialogue poses a question or a discussion of a central theme to your story. And 5. If you want to establish a relationship immediately. How 2 characters talk to one another can reveal a great deal about the nature of their relationship. All these are built around giving the reader just enough to set the scene and characters without overwhelming. They're breadcrumbs. And with that in mind, here's what I recommend against doing this. 1. If every chapter starts with dialogue, since it becomes a predictable pattern and loses its impact. 2. If it's too vague. Starting with dialogue that's overly cryptic or lacking in substance is more likely to lose people than it is to hook. 3. If you're using it as a clumsy tool for exposition since, well, while dialogue is great for conveying exposition, you can immediately tell a writer's skill level by how they handle exposition. Plus, it's just not the most interesting thing if it's the very first chapter. 4. When internal reflection is important, such as if a chapter is focused on a character's internal journey or a significant decision. And 5. When context is important, like if the dialogue won't make sense without understanding the setting or situation. Some scenes need an establishing shot first. As for what an establishing shot is, that's what brings us to technique number 2. Approach number 2. Establishing shots. This is where we touch in with my method of thinking of writing in a manner similar to cinematography. I'm sure we can all think of stuff like a movie in our heads, but as I often end up expressing to people, What's going on in your head doesn't matter if you can't express it on the page. That's why we have techniques like this. With establishing shots, you get a quick snapshot of where and when the story is taking place before zooming in on the characters. Writers who use this technique often use vivid descriptions, sensory details, and sometimes an omniscient POV to paint the broad picture before narrowing down to the action. If you're going to do this, there's 5 times to consider doing this. 1. When setting the scene, when the location, time period, or atmosphere is crucial to the understanding of the scene, an establishing shot can immerse the reader in your world right from the start. 2. When creating a mood and tone. If you want to evoke a specific mood or tone, be it eerie, romantic, tense, or otherwise, an establishing shot can do a lot of the heavy lifting. 3. When introducing a new setting. When a new chapter or section of a book shifts to a different setting, an establishing shot can help orient the reader. 4. In complex worlds. For genres like fantasy or sci-fi, where the world building is intricate, an establishing shot can help lay the groundwork for the reader's imagination. 5. When you want to contrast or foreshadow. If the setting contrasts sharply with the action to come, or if there's a detail in the setting that foreshadows events, an establishing shot can be quite effective. That all said, there are many cases when you should not mess around with this. 1. If it would cause pacing issues. If your story's pacing is brisk and you're in the midst of action, pausing for an establishing shot might disrupt the momentum. 2. In familiar settings. If the setting is a well-known location or similar to ones you've already explored in depth, an establishing shot might be redundant. 3. In character-focused scenes. When a scene is heavily focused on character development or dialogue, you may want to dive straight into the character's perspective instead. 4. When using a minimalistic approach. Some settings are sketched slightly and benefit from the reader's imagination filling in the blanks. 5. When it can cause issues with the narrative style you've established. This is typically the case with filter narrators. I personally enjoy using these during transitions myself, but that's just me. The top thing I'd recommend keeping in mind if you are going to use this is to do it quickly. The majority of modern readers don't have the patience for more than a paragraph or 2 of description. People love to get things in motion, which is what we'll do as well by taking action acts. Approach number 3. Action. Action openings are all about timing and keeping things moving. It's not too difficult to pull off if you keep these 4 things in mind. 1. Jump right into the action. Don't hang around setting the scene or explaining stuff. It's like, bam, Jimmy just jumped off the cliff. No need to describe how he was feeling about the cold water or whatever. Just straight to the action. 2. Start with something big or shocking. Think of it like throwing a surprise party. You want a big, unexpected moment that grabs attention. Could be a fight, a crash, a sudden outburst, anything that makes the reader go, whoa, what's happening here? 3. Keep it real for your characters. Don't suddenly make your shy character the life of the party unless there's a good reason for it. Action at the start should fit who your character is. Like, if you got a bossy character, maybe they're kicking off the scene by ordering someone around. And 4. Action first, thoughts second. If your character is going to reflect on what just happened, let the action come first. Like, Elizabeth slapped the prince. Then she's like, oh no, what did I just do? The action should lead the way, and the thoughts follow. Now, having said all that, not all action is created equally. There are times to use it, and when not to. For instance, on the when not to side, 1. Don't open with action when it could overwhelm the reader. If, say, the previous chapter ended with high tension or action, diving into more action might not give the reader a chance to catch their breath, which could lead to fatigue. 2. Don't do this if there isn't much emotional investment in the characters yet. If the reader hasn't been given a reason to care about the characters or the outcomes of the action yet, they're likely to not care about the events themselves. 3. If there isn't any proper context, this can lead to more confusion than anything else. Make sure the reader knows why the action matters. 4. If the action feels hollow, ensure that any action serves the characters and not just there to fill in space. And 5. When opening the actual story more often than not. You can do this. This is called a catastrophe hook, but it works when a reader is already identifying with a character or so on. This tends to work for sequels or books that already have an established character and such. If the reader doesn't already know who this character is, then it's best to focus more on the character's reactions to whatever happens after the catastrophe as opposed to the catastrophe itself. Now, having said that, I can think of a couple of times when you want to open a chapter with action. 1. To propel the plot forward and keep the pacing tight. 2. After a slow passage, as an action opening can re-engage the narrative. 3. To show a character's skills or traits. Putting them in a situation can be a great way to show instead of tell what they're made of. And 4. If you need to up the ante or introduce immediate stakes. This is another one of those that can be insanely useful but easy to screw up. The one I'd recommend learning and mastering before this is the fourth one I wish to draw attention to. Approach 4. Narrative launches. If you're leaning into quick summaries and use the narrative itself to set up the scene, you can use an opening like this. I've been doing this more lately with my novel The Ties That Blind. The 2 times I've done it so far was one of the 3 reasons why someone might. In one case, it was because of this scenario, when things need to be swift and nifty. If you got a scene that needs to move fast, but there's some essential stuff your readers gotta know, a quick narrative summary can do the trick. It's like taking a shortcut to get to the good stuff. I did this with a scene involving all kinds of tradecraft that the character of Albin went through. It would have been terrible for the pacing and boring if I just played it all out. But by itself, it's fine. As for the other example, when you need to set up the action, sometimes you need to drop a bit of info to get the ball rolling. It's like saying, hey, there was a massive storm last night, and then diving into how the characters deal with the aftermath. I can see this being especially handy with short stories. As for the third scenario, which I haven't used, 3. When a character can't show. Got a character who can't express themselves in a usual way, like they're in a coma, or maybe they're just a little kid. Here's where you let their thoughts do the talking. You can sneak into their heads to let the reader know what's up. I've found this to be an insanely helpful tool. However, like many tools, there are times when not to use it. For instance, 1. If urgency is key, don't let these types of starts sap the momentum. 2. If the reader is familiar with the setting or characters, it can be redundant to not just jump into the scene's action or dialogue. And 3. If the previous chapter ended on a cliffhanger or a particular emotional moment, a narrative launch could deflate the build-up tension. Regardless, it's a pretty simple one to understand, as is the 5th approach. Approach number 5, the zoom. In cinema, when the camera zooms in on something, like a mysterious key or a character's intense look, it tells you, hey, this is important, remember this. In writing, when you focus in detail on something specific, you're doing the same thing. It's like saying, pay attention to this. It's going to be a big deal later in the story. To use this one right, first, keep it short and sweet. You want to be detailed but not drag it out. If you spend too much time on the description, readers might start to skim and miss the point. Second, you should use this technique sparingly. If you're zooming in on everything, nothing seems important. Use it for important stuff. 3, for this, think close up and wide shot. You can start with a detailed zoom in, then pull back to show the bigger picture. This can surprise your readers and make them see things in a new light. Now, for the approach I've really wanted to discuss, approach number 6, the dissolve. The dissolve technique in writing is like smoothly changing scenes in a story by linking them with a common element. Imagine you're watching a movie, and the scene shifts from location to another, but there's something that remains the same in both scenes. Maybe an object or a theme. That's a dissolve. There's 2 ways to pull this technique. The first is the echo or mirror approach, where you end one scene focusing on a specific object or idea and then start the next with the same element. This can work as a smooth transition between things as well, gently guiding the reader from one part of the story to the next, especially when there's a POV shift. The second is the contrast or comedy variant. It's like when a character says they never do something, then smash cut to them doing exactly that. And speaking of smash cuts, that brings me to the final good thing to know about. Approach number 7, jump cuts. This works with a little principle known as in late, out early. Basically, you start your scene as late as possible and leave early before it gets boring. In this case, we're going to focus on the in late part. You don't always have to show everything, like a character walking into a room or leaving or so on. You can skip the lead up, diving straight into the action or conversation. But if you are going to do this, keep these 4 tips in mind. 1. Know your purpose. Understand why you're using a jump cut. Is it to maintain pace? Shift focus? Create surprise? A clear purpose ensures the jump cut adds value. 2. Ensure clarity. Even with a sudden jump, readers should quickly understand the new scene's who, what, and where. A few well-chosen details can orient them without slowing down the narrative. 3. Maintain story flow. Ensure that the jump cut fits seamlessly into the story's overall flow. It should feel like a natural progression, even if it's a sudden shift. 4. Use strong transitions. A good transition can bridge the gap between scenes. This could be a thematic link, a contrast, or a continuation of a plot point, helping the reader make the leap with you. And with that, you now have several tweaks to kick off your chapters. Is there any technique you like more than the others? If so, drop a comment below. And those who are wondering about the opposite end of the spectrum, scenes and chapter endings, we'll discuss all sorts of things about that next week. If you want to know more, be sure to subscribe and support the channel however you can.